Paris. 2 March 1944. 03:17 hours. The sentry stands beneath a street lamp on Rue de Grenelle, breath condensing in the frozen air. He shifts his Mauser from one shoulder to the other, stamps his feet against the cold. Behind him, the requisitioned hotel houses the local Gestapo headquarters. 40 meters down the street, a figure emerges from a doorway. The sentry's hand moves to his rifle. The figure approaches. 20 meters. 15. The sentry opens his mouth to challenge. 10 meters. A gloved hand rises. There is no flash, no crack of gunfire echoing off the Haussmann facades, just a sound like a book dropping onto carpet, impossibly quiet, swallowed instantly by the night. The sentry crumples. The figure is already moving, dragging the body into shadow. 2 minutes later, 3 members of the French resistance enter the building. The sentry will not be found until morning. His death will remain a mystery. No spent cartridge, no scorch marks, nothing to suggest the weapon that killed him was a firearm at all. What the Germans didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that the British had perfected something that should have been impossible. A weapon so silent it redefined the physics of assassination. So effective that enemy sentries, standing mere meters from their comrades, could be eliminated without raising alarm. So secret that even 70 years later, the full details of its deployment remain classified. This is the story of how British engineers created a pistol quieter than a human cough, and how it changed the nature of clandestine warfare forever. In 1940, Britain faced a problem that had never been solved in the history of firearms. The newly formed Special Operations Executive, Churchill's Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, needed to place agents behind enemy lines. These operatives would organize resistance networks, sabotage infrastructure, eliminate high-value targets. But conventional weapons were impossibly loud. A standard pistol firing a 9mm round generates approximately 160 decibels at the muzzle. That's louder than a jet engine at takeoff. Even fitted with primitive suppressors, firearms of the era remained theatrical. The Hollywood silencer was pure fiction. Fire a suppressed Sten gun in 1941 and you'd be heard 3 streets away. The mathematics of the problem seemed insurmountable. The crack of a gunshot comes from 2 sources: the explosion of propellant in the chamber and the sonic boom of the bullet breaking the sound barrier. Suppressors could muffle the first. Nothing could silence the second. Every suppressed weapon was a compromise, quieter perhaps, but still impossibly loud for the work SOE needed done. Agents required something different entirely. A weapon that could eliminate a sentry in a crowded barracks and leave the man in the next bunk sleeping undisturbed. A firearm that produced less noise than a door closing. The engineering challenges seemed impossible. Reduce the powder charge too much and you'd lose stopping power. Make the suppressor too large and the weapon became unwieldy, impossible to conceal. And you had to achieve all this with 1940s materials and manufacturing tolerances, no computer modeling, no acoustic testing chambers, no polymer baffles. The War Office estimated that 70% of SOE missions failed before agents even reached their objectives. German occupation forces had perfected checkpoint procedures. Sentries worked in pairs. Guard posts were never more than shouting distance apart. A single gunshot meant immediate lockdown, mobilization of garrison forces, wholesale reprisals against the civilian population. The Gestapo had made the calculation brutally simple. Any act of armed resistance would cost 10 French, 20 Polish, 50 Soviet lives for every German killed. What SOE needed wasn't just a quiet weapon. They needed a weapon so silent, the act of killing produced less noise than the victim's own collapse. The solution emerged from an unlikely source. The Inter-Services Research Bureau, SOE's technical branch, operated from converted workshops in Hertfordshire. In late 1942, a Major Hugh Reeves assembled a small team at Station 9 in Welwyn Garden City. Their brief was simple. Create a suppressed pistol for close-range assassination. Not reduced noise, not acceptable quietness, genuine silence. Reeves, a firearms designer who'd worked on sporting rifles before the war, understood that conventional thinking wouldn't suffice. The weapon would need to be designed backwards, starting from the sound signature and working back to the mechanism. The breakthrough came from reconsidering every assumption about how firearms worked. Instead of trying to suppress a supersonic bullet, Reeves's team would eliminate the sonic boom entirely. They would design around subsonic ammunition, rounds that never broke the sound barrier. A standard .45 ACP bullet travels at roughly 253 meters per second. The speed of sound is 343 meters per second. By reducing the powder charge, they could keep velocities below 305 meters per second with comfortable margin for atmospheric variation. This solved half the problem. The bullet would arrive silently. But the muzzle blast remained. The suppressor design was revolutionary. Rather than simply baffling escaping gas, the Welrod, as it became known, was essentially a suppressor with a firing mechanism attached. The barrel was just 8 centimeters long, fixed concentrically within a suppressor housing 21 centimeters in length and 3.5 centimeters in diameter. The whole assembly looked like a length of plumber's pipe with a crude pistol grip welded to one end. Inside, a series of metal discs with precisely calculated holes formed expansion chambers. When the cartridge fired, propellant gases expanded into the first chamber, losing pressure. They then passed through a small aperture into the second chamber, expanded again, lost more pressure. By the time gases reached the muzzle, they had expanded through 13 separate chambers, each one bleeding away energy. The gases emerged at barely above atmospheric pressure. The sound, if you could call it that, was roughly equivalent to 2 pieces of wood tapping together. In field tests, operatives fired the weapon in one room, whilst colleagues in the next reported hearing nothing at all. Manufacturing took place at the Small Arms Company in Aston, Birmingham, under conditions of extraordinary secrecy. Workers assembling the weapons were told they were producing specialized surveying equipment. Components were manufactured in separate facilities, barrels machined in one workshop, suppressors in another, grips and triggers in a third. Final assembly occurred in a secure room with restricted access. Even within that room, no worker assembled an entire weapon. One fitted baffles, another installed barrels, a third attached grips. This compartmentalization meant no single person understood the complete design, a security measure typical of SOE's operations. Production numbers remain classified, but estimates based on surviving procurement documents suggest between 2,800 and 14,000 units were manufactured between 1943 and 1945. The variance in estimates reflects the weapon's classifications level. Some production runs simply never appeared in official records. The weapons were never given official War Department designations. Internal SOE documents referred to them simply as hand-firing device Mark I, or used the cover designation Welrod after the Welwyn location. This deliberate obscurity extended to serial numbers, which were minimal and often omitted entirely on weapons destined for operational deployment. Each pistol was hand-fitted. The suppressor baffles required precise spacing. Too tight, and the weapon would jam. Too loose, and effectiveness degraded. Tolerances were measured in fractions of a millimeter. The baffles themselves were stamped from sheet steel, then carefully inspected. Any imperfection, a burr on an edge, a slightly off-center hole, meant rejection. Quality control was absolute because agents' lives depended on reliability. A weapon that jammed during an operation meant death, and probably compromise of entire resistance networks. The barrel was just 8 centimeters long, rifled for accuracy, but the entire assembly was designed as a consumable item. After approximately 200 rounds, carbon fouling would accumulate in the expansion chambers, reducing the suppressor's effectiveness. The sound signature would increase, perhaps to 80 decibels, perhaps to 85. Still quiet by conventional standards, but no longer silent. After 500 rounds, the weapon was considered compromised and was meant to be destroyed. In practice, agents rarely fired them more than a dozen times operationally. Most Welrods saw more use in training than in actual deployment, though the handful that saw extensive field use were thoroughly worn when recovered after the war. The pistol weighed 1.08 kilograms unloaded. It fed from a detachable box magazine holding 6 rounds of .32 ACP, a relatively weak cartridge that nonetheless proved lethal at the ranges SOE operatives would be using it. The weapon fired single shot only, operated by a rotating bolt action not unlike a traditional rifle. This meant the shooter had to manually cycle the action between shots, but it also meant the weapon was utterly reliable. There were no moving parts beyond the bolt, no springs to fail, no gas systems to clog, and crucially, no automatic action meant no mechanical noise, no slide racking, no bolt clacking, just the operator's hand turning the bolt knob, smooth and silent. Operational deployment began in mid-1943. The weapon went to SOE agents parachuting into occupied France, to commandos operating in Norway, to liaison officers working with Yugoslav partisans. It went to Burma, where Force 136 used it against Japanese sentries in the jungle darkness. It went to Denmark, Poland, the Netherlands, anywhere the British operated clandestine networks. The weapon was issued with strict operational guidelines. Agents were instructed to fire only at ranges below 10 meters, ideally closer. They were taught to aim for the head or upper spine, where even the relatively weak .32 ACP cartridge would be immediately lethal. They practiced with dummy rounds, learning the precise feel of the bolt action, the minimal recoil, the almost negligible report. Training took place at various SOE facilities, most notably Arisaig House in the Scottish Highlands and Beaulieu in Hampshire. Agents would fire the weapon in enclosed spaces whilst instructors monitored from adjacent rooms. The standard test involved eliminating a target represented by a mannequin in a mock barracks whilst other instructors, positioned as sleeping sentries, attempted to detect the shot. Agents who failed this test, who generated enough noise to wake the sentries, received additional training until they mastered the weapon's peculiarities. The proper grip, the the smooth bolt manipulation, the controlled breathing that prevented any sound beyond the weapon's inherent signature. Exact operational records remain classified under the 100-year rule, though fragmentary accounts exist in declassified mission reports and personal memoirs. These glimpses reveal a weapon that fundamentally altered what agents could achieve. Missions previously considered suicidal became merely dangerous. Operations requiring entire teams could be conducted by single agents. The calculus of resistance warfare shifted, quietly and without enemy comprehension. One verified operation occurred in Denmark in September 1944. An SOE agent, operating under the codename Flamingo, used a Welrod to eliminate a Gestapo informant who'd been identifying resistance members to occupation authorities. The elimination took place at 2235 in a Copenhagen apartment building. The informant was killed in his kitchen whilst his wife slept in the next room. She woke to find him dead at the breakfast table the following morning, unaware anything had occurred. Local police investigated. No weapon was found. No neighbors reported hearing anything unusual. The case remained unsolved. The operation was considered a complete success, not merely because the target was eliminated, but because the elimination generated no alarm, no reprisals, no compromise of the resistance network. In France, resistance networks operating in urban environments found the Welrod invaluable for what were euphemistically termed executive actions. German soldiers could be eliminated at checkpoints, their bodies not discovered until relief arrived hours later. Gestapo officers could be killed in their homes, in their offices, in circumstances where a conventional weapon would have meant immediate detection. The psychological effect on occupation forces was considerable. Men died inexplicably, with no audible warning, no muzzle flash to return fire toward. Some German units began to believe they were being killed by British commandos wielding crossbows or spring-loaded dart guns. Wild theories circulated in security reports, but the truth was carefully protected. The more fantastic the theories, the better. Mystery served British interests perfectly. If you're finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. It costs nothing, but means these stories keep getting told. What made the Welrod particularly unsettling for German forces was its complete absence from standard military intelligence reports. Wehrmacht field manuals contained detailed sections on Allied weapons, recognition silhouettes, technical specifications, suggested countermeasures. The Welrod appeared in none of them. When examples were occasionally captured, they defied classification. They looked improvised, crude, impossible. German intelligence officers examining captured specimens sometimes concluded they were one-off fabrications by local resistance groups, never understanding they were standardized British military equipment manufactured in quantity. This intelligence failure was deliberate. The Welrod was never mentioned in captured documents, never photographed for technical intelligence purposes, never discussed outside secure facilities. The weapon represented Britain's approach to clandestine warfare made physical. Whereas American suppressed weapons of the period, the high-standard HDM pistol, various suppressed M3 submachine guns aimed for acceptably reduced noise levels, the British aimed for genuine silence. The HDM, issued to OSS operatives, generated approximately 120 decibels suppressed. That's library noise versus industrial machinery. The Welrod, by contrast, measured approximately 73 decibels at 1 meter. That's quieter than a typical conversation, about as loud as a modern dishwasher. In practical terms, the American weapons made killing quieter. The British weapon made it silent. The Germans never developed a comparable system. Their suppressed weapons, various Schalldämpfer attachments for standard pistols, reduced signature modestly but remained audibly firearms. Part of this was operational doctrine. German Special Operations Forces, particularly the Brandenburgers, favored stealth through movement and timing rather than silent weapons. When eliminations were necessary, they used knives, garrotes, or accepted the noise signature of unsuppressed firearms. There's evidence the SS experimented with suppressed weapons for security operations, but these were conventional suppressors on existing firearms, not purpose-designed silent weapons. The Germans simply never considered the problem worth solving at the engineering level the British did. The Americans, despite developing their own suppressed weapons, quietly requested Welrod samples in late 1943. OSS liaison officers observed SOE training exercises and were, by all accounts, astonished at the weapon's performance. Small numbers of Welrods were transferred to OSS units operating in the Balkans and Southeast Asia. After the war, American weapons designers incorporated Welrod principles into various suppressed weapons programs, though none quite achieved the same acoustic performance within such a compact package. The true impact of the Welrod is impossible to quantify with precision. How do you measure the value of sentries eliminated without raising alarm? Operations completed that would have been impossible with conventional weapons? Enemy officers assassinated in occupied cities where gunfire would have meant savage reprisals? The official SOE history, published in 1966 with substantial redactions, mentions the weapon obliquely as specialist equipment for close-range work. Declassified mission reports occasionally reference it as silent device, or simply note that targets were eliminated quietly. What can be said is that no agent operating behind enemy lines after mid-1943 requested deployment without one. That speaks volumes. The weapon's legacy extended well beyond 1945. The Welrod remained in British military inventory for decades. Special forces used them in Malaya during the emergency, in Northern Ireland during the Troubles, in various classified operations across the Cold War. Modified versions appeared: the Welrod Mark IIA with improved sights, various caliber variants, experimental models that never entered production. The basic design proved so sound that modern suppressed pistols still incorporate its core principles: subsonic ammunition, staged expansion chambers, bolt-action reliability. The most recent confirmed operational use was 2003. The weapon saw 60 years of active service, an extraordinary lifespan for a firearm designed in wartime desperation. Today, surviving examples reside in military museums across Britain. The Imperial War Museum in London displays one in their Secret War exhibition. The Small Arms School Corps Museum at Warminster holds several examples, including prototypes with different baffle configurations. These weapons look curiously underwhelming in glass cases, crude, improvised, unimpressive. Which was rather the point. They were never meant to impress. They were meant to kill silently, and at that singular task, they had no equal. Consider the engineering achievement these devices represent. In 1942, using wartime materials and limited manufacturing capacity, British designers created a weapon that reduced firearm noise by 87 decibels. That's a reduction in acoustic intensity of approximately 99.95%. They did this without computers, without modern metallurgy, without any of the acoustic modeling tools contemporary suppressor designers consider essential. They did it through empirical testing, mathematical calculation, and the kind of practical engineering brilliance Britain had always excelled at. The tolerances involved were extraordinary. Chamber volumes calculated to 3 decimal places, baffle spacing precise to within half a millimetre. All manufactured in workshops that were simultaneously producing thousands of other wartime essentials. The Welrod succeeded because it was designed for a single, specific mission profile. Close-range elimination in circumstances where any audible gunfire meant mission failure or worse. It was never meant to be a general-purpose weapon. Rate of fire was abysmal, perhaps 5 aimed shots per minute. Range was limited, reliably lethal to 15 meters, though accurate at twice that distance. The sights were rudimentary, little more than a groove along the top of the suppressor housing. Reloading required removing the entire grip assembly. But none of these limitations mattered. SOE operatives weren't engaging in firefights. They were eliminating sentries, removing informants, conducting what modern parlance terms targeted elimination. For that mission, the Welrod was perfect. The weapon's very existence challenged assumptions about what firearms could be. For centuries, guns had been synonymous with noise. The crack of muskets, the roar of artillery, the chatter of machine guns. Violence announced itself acoustically. Gunfire meant alarm, response, escalation. The Welrod broke that equation. It allowed killing that was, for practical purposes, undetectable. A man could die, and the world would never hear it happen. That had profound implications, both tactical and psychological. It meant clandestine operations could occur in circumstances previously thought impossible. It meant enemy forces could never feel secure, even in their own garrisons, even surrounded by their own soldiers. The psychological impact of that uncertainty was, arguably, as valuable as the weapon's direct tactical applications. Rue de Grenelle. 6 March 1944. Morning. The hotel requisition officer finds the sentry 4 days late. The body has been concealed poorly, hastily, but in March the cold preserves things. There is confusion initially. No bullet wound is immediately apparent. A doctor is summoned. The bullet is found eventually, having entered beneath the right ear at a slight upward angle, fragmenting inside the skull. It's a small caliber round, .32 perhaps, badly deformed. No cartridge case exists. No scorching indicates close-range discharge. The weapon remains a mystery. The doctor notes in his report that death would have been instantaneous, silent. The sentry likely never knew he was under attack. The investigation concludes nothing. The file joins thousands of others, documenting inexplicable deaths during the occupation. The resistance members who entered the building that night extracted intelligence that led to the elimination of 17 Gestapo officers over the following month. The operation was considered successful. The weapon was returned to London, its suppressor still within tolerances, ready for the next agent, the next mission, the next impossible task. That sentry in Paris never heard the weapon that killed him. Neither did thousands of others across occupied Europe. They died to a device that should not have existed, that defied the known limitations of firearms technology, that gave Britain's clandestine forces an advantage enemy intelligence services never fully understood. In the darkness of occupied territory, in the frozen nights of garrison duty, German soldiers died, and their comrades never heard a thing. Just the sound of a body falling, which might have been anything, might have been nothing at all. That was the Welrod's genius. Not that it was quiet, but that it was silent.